All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We have Andrew Konya joining us from Remesh. Andrew has spent the past 10 years developing and applying machine learning to problems in material science, biosensing, traffic, image analysis, language, and market research. As a consultant with the United Nations, he works on applying AI and ML to peacekeeping. And as the founder and CEO of Remesh, Andrew focuses on leveraging AI to enable anyone to instantly understand a population. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into what exactly that means. Interestingly, Andrew and his firm just raised a pretty sizable round from General Catalyst, so a vote of confidence there from some well-known VCs. So Andrew, thanks for joining us today. I want to kick off our conversation by kind of basing the audience in the pain point that exists within your customer base. So if you can help us with some contextual understanding of what exactly we're looking at here, that'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. So you can think of the pain point broadly as understanding people, but if we step back a little bit, we can put that in a better light. So, you know, right now we are in a state where the world is changing in ways that are faster than it used to. So a byproduct of things like the internet, which have moved the time scales of social change and cultural evolution to be faster than they once were. Add in COVID, which has created volatility for consumers and what they do and how they act, and have changed the lives of employees and how they work, where they work from, and what their life around that looks like. And as a result, you have a world where no one really has a good grasp on the populations that they impact. And so, you know, every year there's, I think, global GDP is like $72 trillion. So $72 trillion of human effort happens every year. And where that goes is directed by people who make decisions about what they're going to build and work on and service and think about over the next year. And so the challenge is, the problem is, for a person whose job it is to make a decision that is going to impact a big population of people, whether it's customers, employees, or voters, they need to understand what the world of those people is, what their life is like, what they care about. Because at least in a free market society, the hope is that if you build the thing that they most want and need, then that is the way to most succeed. And so what we're focused on broadly is making that easy, make it easy for any person to understand the population. More specifically, we learned that the world has kind of been full of trade-offs when it comes to understanding people. On one side, you can go deep and you can really get to know a person through a live conversation, right? It's what you and I are doing. Right. And you're going to follow up on what I say, and you wouldn't have been able to predict all your questions ahead of time because you have to react and go back and forth. And you're not asking me poll questions, right? It's like real conversation. But that is really hard to scale. And so on the flip side, so you generally only do that with a couple people. And so you maybe have an anecdotal idea of something, but you don't have any confidence. And so you can flip that and go, well, the other option is to do things like big surveys and polls where you do it with a ton of people, but you lose the back and forth of conversation. You lose the ability to discover unknown unknowns. And as a result, you can confirm a hypothesis that you can test quantitatively, but you can't really go beyond it. And in a world where things are changing quicker and more unpredictable, you really want to know the truth, but also be confident in it. And so what we focused on is using machine learning to scale the paradigm of live one-on-one conversation up to a 1-to-n paradigm. So instead of 1-to-1, can we scale it to 1-to-100 or 1-to-1,000? And then make that so easy that, well, we say so easy a politician could use it. But most of our customers are you know, like insights professionals and such at like Fortune 500 customers or Fortune 500 companies. But yeah, the idea is like, you know, make it as easy as talking to a friend or running a chat, but do it at a statistically significant scale so you can confidently understand a population quickly.
Awesome. So you've built a product kind of at the nexus of, let's say if I'm an organization, I'm going to bring in a focus group. I can have those one-to-one or one-to-a-few conversations, but there's always a limitation in terms of how much I'm going to understand, because you only have so many people who can do surveys, and you have only so many people who are going to participate. On the other end, you can send 1 million surveys out to your entire customer base, your entire user base. But that's kind of, I guess you don't have that real-time conversation, right?
Yeah, so you can only ask the questions you know to ask ahead of time. That's the limit, right? And so, the real important things you're going to learn aren't the questions you knew to ask. It's actually learning the question. You learn something that says, the right question to ask is this. Right. And then what you learn from the answers to that is really what is where all the insight is, or where the real understanding generally comes from.
Okay, awesome. And so how does this look? If I'm that business analyst within one of these Fortune 500 companies, how am I actually engaging with Remesh?
Yeah, so commercially, we generally will do like these large enterprise deals where we'll work with usually like the VP of Insights or the CMO, and they'll get Remesh and make it available to a bunch of people within their organization. So those bunch of people are typically Insights managers, directors of Insight, different kind of people whose job it is to answer questions about customers or employees for people like product managers or people in IT or innovation. Tactically though, if you are one of those people now using it, it looks kind of like going on, you say, here's who the audience I want to have a conversation with. Sometimes we'll go out and recruit that audience for people. So tell us, I want to talk to people in the Midwest who have pink BMWs and listen to Sirius XM radio. I don't know, making all that up, but and we want to have that conversation tomorrow at 2:00. And those people will magically show up for them, and they'll have this large conversation. In that conversation, to them, I used to describe it as we turn the population into like an AI you chat with that represents them, but It's got a little more fancy than that, and so it's more like an AI who you can click on their brain and look at all the details under the hood and what the population's saying and thinking in response to something. And live during the conversation, it just goes back and forth. So you can think of the analyst go, hey, I'm trying to understand feedback on my new product. Let me show you a picture of it. Here's what we're thinking. What is your first reaction to it, right? And they'll click send. And now all of the participants will answer in natural language. They'll react to each other's responses. And in about a minute, we will summarize all of that together and show the person asked the question everything that they need to know about how the population answered. And they'll go on and ask the next question. And so they might find out, whoa, I really like it, but I would in no way trust something that said it came from goats. And the person went, well, why don't you trust goats? And so they'll follow up and dive deeper. Obviously, never seen goats be an issue, but
So in this process, right, would the first step when you're working with this client be to understand the audience they want to connect with? So in my mind, I'm imagining the client gives you some details. This happens over a person-to-person phone call. And then your team organizes the audience that they want to communicate with, right? They ask, and then eventually they have this live session where they're asking questions to that particular audience, real humans. And the AI, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I want to understand exactly what the AI is doing. But the AI is understanding the context of these answers and summarizing so that the person on the client side can then follow up with additional questions to provide more insight.
You nailed it. So I'll make one note or one caveat maybe on the non-AI part, which is on getting that audience. So there's really a range that this happens. In my favorite side of the range, we have something called instant audience, which is you click a button and magically the people show up like 5 minutes. So, it's very fast from I need to answer a question and talk to enough population to 5 minutes later, you're talking to them, and 30 minutes later, you are done and you've made a decision, right? Now, that's contrast that with the more hard to get populations, right? So we've had people who want to talk to bankers with $10 million of money or of assets under management. And those obviously will take days to actually recruit those people to join. And then in other times, they want to talk to employees. And so they just didn't send out a calendar link or something like that to invite employees. But on the AI part, you're totally right. It is what happens that allows an open-ended question to go out to hundreds of people, and for the results to be compressed into something that can be consumed in about 30 seconds, so you can figure out to ask the next question, right? So ideally, we don't want our customers thinking, holy moly, AI. We want our customers thinking like, that makes sense. I understand it. Next question.
Right. Where they don't even understand that AI is involved. It's just, look, I essentially have another human who synthesized all of this information, or, summarized all of this information and provided me with the insights that I need. So then in terms of actually building the AI, can you talk a little bit about, and I think this is interesting because coming from a startup, it's a little bit different than coming from an organization where you have a ton of data that you're leveraging, that you can hopefully leverage from day one, right? So can you talk us through data strategy? Where did you guys start with data? And then how do you roll into actually training these models to be able to make accurate predictions, summarizations to your customer?
Yeah, certainly. So I'll explain to you a little bit of how the model works, and then work backwards to explain like how to make sure you have data for it. So you can think of, there's really two problems that we solve. We solve them now in a way that is related, but you can think of them as unrelated. The first problem is a data inference problem. It's a prediction problem. And that is, let's make it simple. Let's say I have 100 people only. And I ask 100 people their answer to a question, so I get 100 answers. Now what I really want is I want to be able to know every person's reaction to every other person's answers. But obviously you can't have every person look at 100 different answers in 30 seconds. It's not feasible. And now if you make that go to 1,000, right, it explodes. It's like an n-squared explosion of amount of data you need. So what we do is we can only sample a very small amount of people's reactions to each one of those things. And then the rest we have to predict. And so that first problem I'll call the prediction problem. Which is given your reaction to a few answers, I need to predict your reaction to all the rest of them, and do that for all people. The second problem we'll call the compression problem, which is you, the moderator, do not want to read even 100 answers, much alone 1,000. And so I need to compress that list of 100 or 1,000 things down to the answers that are most representative, and that should be in the order of maybe 10. And so, on one side, you're solving a prediction, and the other side, you're solving compression. So what's interesting about how we do it now is that we actually solve the cold start problem on every single question. We train a completely new model on all the data for that question to predict it kind of one-off. But so our challenge was a bit of a meta problem, which is how do we gain confidence that being able to throw this model at every one of these questions is going to produce consistent and good results. And so for us, luckily, we started with this is maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Initially, we started with like a bit of a social networky experiment thing where we just had people doing conversations for fun. And that let us build up a data set. And so once we had the data set, we could then start testing algorithms against it. We defined some metrics in terms of what good was going to mean, right? And so for us, how good can it predict? And then a subjective metric of like when it compresses, how good is that compression? And then it was a matter of kind of putting on the academic hat and going like, okay, what's the best way technically to actually solve this and get good results? And then in there, whenever we would hit something where like we needed a bunch of data that we didn't have. So an example of this is we wanted to look at how good a variant of a topic algorithm we had was. And we wanted to compare our algorithm to something. We actually would pay humans to do it. So I think in that case, we pay 5 human experts to go and do their own topic coding of a bunch of data. And then we would compare how good or how consistent was the human to another human with how consistent was our algorithm to those humans. And that would let us then test those. So as a hybrid of kind of dirty experiments that generated data to kind of get up and running, paying humans to just literally create exactly the data we need. And that some of that's expert. Sometimes we use Mechanical Turk if we can get it in that sense. And now I would say, now that we're up and running, obviously, like our platform generates, you know, tons and tons of data every single minute. So it's a bit of a different game once you cross through there. You can do more sophisticated things.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And I guess in that process, were there any particular lessons you learned, right? Because, you know, as we walk through it, it sounds pretty simplistic, but as you know, there are a ton of experimentations that go wrong. You find data that you think is great, it's horrible in reality. So I'm curious if there were any things where, if you could say, Andrew, you know, when you were first starting this company, here are the things that you might see in this process that you should think about today.
Yeah, certainly. So one of them is it's an obvious one in retrospect, but a lesson learned, which is make sure that the data you are testing, training, and validating on matches the same type of data that you would have your customers be generating and you working with. Early on, we were generating a lot of our data specifically just for politics, right? So we were, helping understand what was happening. This was in 2016. So we were like understanding what was happening with the American populace during the last presidential election. And we had a few algorithms that looked really good on it. And then we went over to like apply those to some customer data, because we were just starting to gain customers in 2016. And the results look very different. So that was a quick lesson, and make sure there's match between obvious, but important. I think a second one, which maybe is more applicable to us than more broadly, but certainly is important, which is we are in the trust game, right? Meaning people want to understand a population, want to trust that their understanding is correct.
Right.
And typically the people who get paid to understand populations get paid to know when not to trust a result, right? That's a key part of their job. And some of our early algorithms were hard to, sounds silly, but were hard to explain what was going on. Mm-hmm. And because it was hard to explain, that made it hard to trust. And it didn't matter if it was actually better. Especially 4 years ago, something that was black box AI was like not something you were going to bet your company on, right?
Right.
So we had to quickly adapt to an approach which could be more easily explained and understood. So even the people who we would work with who were maybe statisticians could be walked through the general idea of it and made to understand it, versus something that was really, really abstract. I think that has shifted over the last maybe 3 or 4 years as people become more comfortable with how good is it being, or how does it work being an answer that says, well, it's 82% of the time it's correct on this task, instead of like, here's the math of how it works. But at least 4 years ago, that's how it was.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. And what I want to key in on is, because I think this was an interesting point that you made, that, you know, when you're training your algorithms on data that is not directly relevant to, let's say, if it's, you know, you trained it on a data set that's based on politics, your customer is a marketing organization, right? Unrelated. That makes a difference. So what I'm curious about is the actual customer conversation when those predictions come out and they kind of get the head turn, like, wait, this is it, not exactly relevant. So how do you navigate that? Because I can imagine that that's a situation that a lot of people would run into today still.
Yep. I would ask them to put me in a room with the smartest mathematician in their company and let me prove it to that person. Basically say, is there a person in your company who, if they say they trust it, you will trust it? And then I would get in a room with that person. I would walk them through everything about how our stack worked, how the algorithm worked. And 95% of the time that was good. They got it. They then went to their boss and said, you can trust it. And everyone would say, great, we can trust it. And that was good when your number of customers is small, but that approach doesn't scale, right? So it really became an issue when like I couldn't copy and paste myself to be in enough places enough times. That was like the tactical bit of it. The way that we realized to actually scale it is, I think in retrospect, I would say we did this because it was a smart way to do this, though that maybe wasn't the motivation. We were starting to work with the United Nations, and their bar for how good you have to prove something works is probably higher than most
Okay.
companies encountered. And so what we did is we worked with them to basically define a problem, apply everything to it in kind of a wide scope, and measure and publish the results, specifically focused on how confident can you be in these results. And so I think in working with them, that forced us to really hone in a good answer to that and explain the algorithm in an academic way, publish that paper through a peer-reviewed thing. I think we presented at NeurIPS, which is like an ML conference. And then that kind of became the collateral that got sent to all of our customers, so that if they really wanted to dig in and know how it works and how much they should trust it, now they actually have something that they can refer to. So that paper, I guess, became the version of crystallizing what was being explained in rooms into a piece of collateral that could help it scale, help that explanation scale.
Okay. Awesome. No, that's helpful. And so to change gears here, but to still stay focused on this customer conversation piece, I'm curious how you actually entered the market with your first product. How do you acquire that first customer? And then beyond that, how do you then shift, because you guys have scaled up since then? How do you then shift to have a broader sales and marketing organization, or just customer conversations where you're acquiring kind of beyond those relationship sales?
Yeah, so initially we were aiming just to solve this for peacekeeping. We were like, well, we need to help peacekeepers understand dynamic populations like in an hour. So once we kind of had that, we were what you're not supposed to be as a startup, which was we were a hammer looking for nails. Luckily, we were fairly systematic about it. So the initial thing we did is, we did just a bunch of calling and talking to people who we thought could be potential customers or use cases. I think we had a list of 100 hypotheses, which was a customer plus a use case plus how much we would charge. Very quickly, that list shrunk as we learned we were wrong on most of it. We ended up dialing into people whose job it was to optimize the spend of employee engagement initiatives, and people whose job it was to conduct market research. And then we actually started, I don't think you can do this anymore, but we wrote down a bunch of a matrix of value propositions and like very specific customers, meaning not just a hand wave, but like a qualitative insights manager at a company of this size.
Created your custom, like an avatar, for.
You got it. And so what we did is we basically bought a bunch of LinkedIn ads that targeted at those, I think, 10 different customer personas, and targeted those 10 different value propositions. And then we looked at conversion rates on all of it. And what we found was conversion rates of one value prop to one customer persona way outplayed everyone else. So that means like they clicked through at like 10x the rate.
Wow.
And that was qualitative market researchers. And the value proposition was qualitative market research at quantitative scale at the speed of conversation. And so we started calling them, the next week, immediately started getting on the phone with all of them. And we just demoed it for them. So we showed, this is how it works. Here, let us show you how we can quickly understand something. And we learned that, I wish I could say we knew this and that's why we went to market, but what we learned was we had basically found a way to take what is common market research practice of doing a focus group, taking that and then validating it with a survey that would take like 2-3 weeks if you were pretty quick at it. And we could compress the whole thing down to 1 hour. And so that value proposition of taking something that took weeks and having it happen, in an hour or a day was really strong. And so at that point, we had our first customer. We were to market.
And is that essentially kind of what you're leveraging when you're speaking with customers and speaking about, well, here's what we can do tangibly, right? Here are the metrics that we can speak to related to ROI. I'm curious that, you talked about how you launched and got those initial customers, but today, are there ROI metrics that you cite that customers really grab onto when they're thinking about actually buying the product?
Yeah, certainly. So I would say one of them is speed of innovation. So, in the same way that being agile in software development means that you make a little step, you test and get more information, and then you keep going. Most large organizations are not if you add in a 1-month process for market research at every turn of your innovation cycle, then what you're left with is an innovation cycle that will just like adhere and be slow in that way. What we found though, if you inject us in, turn that 1-month cycle down to a 1-day cycle, all of a sudden the whole thing speeds up. So we found that's one of our most potent, the most potent ROI is basically ROI on spend on innovation money. Meaning it get a product to market faster, and that product is more likely to be something that will resonate with your customers. The second one is increased ROI on marketing spend. So you can imagine if you now are consulting with your customers hundreds at a time, every time you're designing anything that you're about to push out and it's part of a marketing campaign, then your campaigns do better. And as a result, you get a lot more, whatever your metric is on marketing, whether that's leads or customers or retention, that you get more impact from it. So those are the two we generally will talk to when we're talking with like C levels or VP levels. Although when we're talking maybe on the ground with a researcher, we'll generally talk more about time saved. The idea being like, accomplish what you need to accomplish, but like go home from work earlier and take a vacation because it doesn't take as much labor. Yeah.
Right. Very interesting. And I know we're coming up on time here, but last question for you. As you thought about building out the technology, you had this vision for, what could be built, right? I'm curious about, as you think about artificial intelligence, there's a very particular skill set that you need to build real AI, right? So from day one, how did you think about the right pieces to put in place to make that happen?
Looking back, I would now say the answer is people, once you're up and running. But before you can pay to hire people who are better than you at everything, I think it is a obsessive focus on the first principles of the problem you're solving. It's easy to be distracted by cool, and cool can often get in the way of solved. So I think for us, it was like step one was define the problem with precision. Step two was once you've defined the problem, understand the scope of solutions. And then once you understand the scope of solutions, understand the data you need to start building the models against it. So, building the models, I would say, is actually like this skill set there is you have to be able to read academic papers and understand how to pull code from GitHub, and then mix those two things together to build something of your own, but not total rocket science. I would say the harder part is getting the data right, and like doing the right amount of all of that stuff. It's almost like figuring out the right 80% of how you productize, where you get your data from and how you create it, and then how you add, like how you train models and add them into it, to like put it all together into one cohesive package. And like getting everything across that 80% line, I think is the key.
Yeah, and generally, and speaking with a number of startups, the rate at which you want to build, innovate, usually happens faster than the rate at which you can acquire talent. So I'm curious if there are any kind of, lessons learned, any tips that you would give in terms of kind of scaling up in that way, right? And being able to build what you have in your mind.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience. I think the very first version of it, I built just myself. And I think it's very helpful to be able to do that. I was coming from a background in computational and theoretical physics. So like I was pretty good with computers. Step two is then to go, what, as you start scaling out and adding people in, my general heuristic even today, as we build the company is, what do I not like doing and what am I not that good at, but I'm doing? And anytime I can identify that, I want to go and find the best person in the world at that thing, hire them and delegate it. And so when it came to ML, I was like, find the best person at this piece of it, hire them, delegate it. When it comes to, architecting actual software, in retrospect, I was horrible at it, but good enough to get an MVP out and shipped. So hire a person who's going to be really good at it. And so that heuristic just over and over and over of find what you're not good at and don't like doing, but are doing, and find the best person in the world, hire them and delegate it. Has been how I've done it since then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's, you built the first version, right? But there was some point when you had to make the decision. All right, I cannot be in the nuts and bolts of building this. I am running this organization, and there are a million other things that I need to be doing. So I need to.
You got it.
So, okay, awesome. Well, I know that's all we have for time here. Don't want to hold you too long. We appreciate you for joining us. This was definitely informative, and hopefully we can have you back again someday.
And thank you, Darius. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.